A racist cop tased my wife right in front of me while I stood helpless. We had pulled into a dusty gas station off the highway, just needing fuel and a restroom break. No speeding, no broken taillight, no reason at all. Suddenly, flashing lights, a sheriff's deputy barking orders, and before I could even blink, my wife was screaming, her body convulsing under 50,000 volts. I flashed my badge, screamed my title, FBI Director, but the deputy just smirked and slammed me into the hood of our own car. Around us, bystanders just watched, silent. No help, no mercy. They thought they could do whatever they wanted to us because of how we looked. They had no idea who they were messing with. Because not only am I a federal agent, I'm the FBI Director. And if they thought they could tase my wife and walk away clean, they were about to learn just how badly they had underestimated the wrong man. But let's start at the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where in the world you're listening from today. I still remember the exact moment our lives changed. Not the day I was appointed FBI Director. That was a milestone, sure. But I'm talking about the night that taught me justice and power aren't always on speaking terms. My wife Teresa and I had been driving for nearly 6 hours, heading back from visiting her sister in Memphis. The highway stretched endlessly before us, cutting through the small towns of rural Tennessee like an afterthought. The setting sun painted everything in amber and shadow. "We should stop for gas," Teresa said, pointing at the gauge hovering just above empty. "And I could use a bathroom break." I nodded, feeling the stiffness in my back from the long drive. Next exit. 10 minutes later, I pulled into a rundown gas station, one of those places with buzzing fluorescent lights that seemed to attract more moths than customers. The concrete was cracked, weeds pushing through like persistent questions. Only one other car sat in the lot, an old pickup with a Confederate flag decal on the back window. I noticed it, filed it away mentally, the way I'd been trained to catalog details. "I don't like this place," Teresa murmured, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "We'll be quick," I promised, squeezing her hand. "Just gas and bathroom." I had just finished inserting my credit card at the pump when the night exploded with light. Blue and red flashes painted Teresa's worried face through the windshield. My stomach dropped as police lights reflected in all our mirrors. No siren had announced their arrival, just sudden, silent presence like they'd materialized from the darkness itself. "What did we do?" Teresa asked, her voice tight. "Nothing," I said, keeping my voice level despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Absolutely nothing." I stood perfectly still as the officer emerged from his cruiser. Even from a distance, I could read his body language, the aggressive forward lean, hand already resting on his weapon, the deliberate swagger designed to intimidate. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was something else entirely. "Stay calm," I told Teresa through the open window. "I'll handle this." The officer approached, white, mid-40s, with a buzz cut and a neck too thick for his collar. His nameplate read, "Officer Denton." He didn't look at me directly, just circled our car like a predator. "License and registration," he barked, still not making eye contact. "Officer, may I ask why we're being stopped? We were just getting gas." "I said license and registration." His voice rose sharply, hand tightening on his holster. I reached slowly for my wallet. "I'm going to get my ID now, officer." 20 years in the Bureau had taught me the choreography of these moments. Move slowly, narrate your actions, keep your hands visible. But something told me the rules weren't going to protect us tonight. As I extended my license, the officer finally looked at me, really looked at me, and something shifted in his expression. His eyes flicked to Teresa, then back to me, then to our car's out-of-state plates. Without warning, he moved to the passenger side and yanked open Teresa's door. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Teresa froze, her eyes wide with confusion. "What? Why?" "Officer," I said carefully, "we were just getting gas. We haven't committed any traffic violation." He ignored me completely. I said, "Get out of the car now." Teresa looked at me, fear blooming across her face. "Marcus, what's happening?" "Stay where you are, Teresa," I said firmly, then addressed the officer. "Sir, I'm a federal agent. If you could please explain." "Federal agent?" he sneered. "Sure you are." Then he reached into the car and grabbed Teresa's arm. "Don't touch me," she cried out, instinctively pulling back. What happened next played out in terrible slow motion. The officer stepped back, unholstered something from his belt. Not his gun, but a yellow and black device I recognized instantly. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward. Too late. The taser barbs hit my wife in the chest. Her body went rigid, a strangled sound escaping her throat as 50,000 volts coursed through her. Her head snapped back against the headrest, eyes rolling upward. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. I heard myself shouting, felt my body moving toward her, but everything seemed distant, underwater. Teresa's body convulsed, her hands clawing at nothing. "Stop!" I roared. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, stand down!" The officer turned toward me, taser still engaged, his face twisted in an expression I'd seen countless times in my career, the intoxication of unchecked power. For a terrible moment, I thought he might shoot me too. "On the ground! Now!" he shouted, finally releasing the taser trigger. Teresa slumped in her seat, small, involuntary tremors still running through her limbs. Blood roared in my ears. Every instinct screamed to fight to protect her, to make this man pay. But training kicked in. Training and the cold calculation that if I resisted, we might both end up dead on this cracked concrete, our bodies cooling under those buzzing fluorescent lights. I slowly raised my hands. My credentials are in my breast pocket. I'm going to reach for them very slowly. "On the ground first," he barked, now drawing his actual firearm. I lowered myself to my knees, hands still raised, eyes locked on Teresa. She was conscious but dazed, tears streaming silently down her face, small muscle spasms still racking her body. In that moment, kneeling on the rough pavement, watching my wife suffer, something crystallized inside me, hard and cold and unforgiving as diamond. This wasn't just about tonight. This wasn't just one bad cop. This was about power and justice, and what happens when the two no longer recognize each other. I scrambled out of the car, my movements precise despite the rage thundering through my veins. 23 years with the Bureau had taught me to channel anger into action, to keep my head when everything was falling apart. But seeing Teresa's body convulsing from the taser, that pushed me to the edge. "Federal agent!" I shouted, reaching for my credentials. The leather wallet felt heavy in my hands as I flipped it open, the gold shield catching the harsh gas station lights. "FBI Director Marcus Reynolds. Stand down immediately." Officer Denton barely glanced at my badge. His lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Well, ain't you special?" he drawled, deliberately slow. "FBI Director? In my town?" He chuckled, a dry sound like leaves scraping concrete. "And I'm the goddamn president." "Check the credentials," I insisted, holding the badge higher. "Call it in if you need to, but release my wife now." My peripheral vision caught movement. A small cluster of people had gathered near the convenience store entrance. 3 men, a woman clutching her purse, a teenager with wide eyes, witnesses. Good. "Help us," I called out to them. "Call 911. Their eyes slid away from mine. The woman whispered something to one of the men who shook his head slightly. No one moved. No one reached for a phone. Denton's radio crackled. He answered without taking his eyes off me. "Got him, Sheriff? Just like you said." A chill ran through me. Just like you said? This wasn't random. This was planned. "Sir, I need you to place your hands behind your back," Denton said, his voice suddenly official, performing now for the small audience. "I'm FBI Director Marcus Reynolds," I repeated, my voice steady and authoritative. "This is an unlawful detention. You've assaulted a federal agent's spouse. Stand down now and we can resolve this without—" He moved with surprising speed for his bulk. 1 second I was standing, the next my chest slammed against the hood of my own car, the metal still warm from our journey. Pain exploded across my cheekbone as he ground my face into the hood. "Resisting arrest," he announced loudly for the benefit of the onlookers. "I'm not resisting," I managed to say, though the pressure on my neck made it difficult to speak. I could taste blood where my lip had split against my teeth. "Sure sounds like resisting to me," Denton replied, wrenching my arms behind my back. The cold bite of handcuffs cut into my wrists as he ratcheted them too tight, deliberately placing them over my watchband to pinch the skin. My FBI training kicked in. Don't escalate. Document everything. Survive now, fight later. I forced myself to go limp, to offer no resistance that could be used against me. "Marcus!" Teresa's voice came from inside the car, stronger now but edged with panic. "What's happening?" "It's okay," I called back, though nothing was okay. "Stay calm, I'll handle this." Denton yanked me upright by the cuffs, sending bolts of pain through my shoulders. "You ain't handling shit," he hissed in my ear, low enough that only I could hear. "You in South Haven now. Your fancy badge don't mean nothing here." My heart hammered against my ribs. In 2 decades with the Bureau, I'd faced down cartel leaders, terrorists, and corrupt officials across 3 continents. But something about this place, about the casual cruelty in Denton's voice, sent ice water through my veins. This wasn't just one bad cop. This was something systemic, something rotten at the core. "My wife needs medical attention," I said, keeping my voice level. "She was unnecessarily tased and could be experiencing cardiac issues." "She'll get checked out at the station," Denton replied, though his tone made it clear he had no intention of following through. He marched me toward his cruiser, parked at an angle that blocked most of the gas station's exit. As we passed the silent bystanders, I locked eyes with the teenage boy. "Remember my name," I told him. "Marcus Reynolds, FBI Director. Remember what you saw here tonight." The boy's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, but he gave an almost imperceptible nod. Denton shoved me roughly into the back of the squad car, my head barely missing the doorframe. "Shut your mouth if you know what's good for you." Through the window, I could see another officer approaching my car where Teresa still sat. The sight of her, dignified even in her fear, her back straight as the new officer spoke to her, both broke my heart and steeled my resolve. That's when I saw him. Standing in the shadows beside the convenience store, partially obscured by an ice machine, was a heavy-set man in a tan uniform. The 5-pointed star on his chest caught the light as he shifted his weight. The sheriff. Even from this distance, I could see his satisfied smile as he watched the scene unfold. Not the reaction of someone responding to an incident, but of someone who had orchestrated it. Our eyes met across the parking lot, and instead of looking away, his smile widened. He raised his coffee cup in a mock toast, then turned and disappeared around the corner of the building. In that moment, handcuffed in the back of a patrol car, watching my wife being interrogated through the window, seeing the sheriff's smug satisfaction, I understood with perfect clarity. We had driven into something much bigger and much darker than a random traffic stop. This was a trap, and we had driven straight into it. The cruiser bumped along the cracked roads, each jolt sending fresh pain through my shoulders. The cage separating me from Officer Denton might as well have been a portal to another America, one where my credentials, my position, my very humanity meant nothing. I fixed my gaze on the back of Denton's head, committing every detail to memory. The small scar behind his right ear. The way his crew cut grew unevenly at the nape. The slightly off-center placement of his name badge, M. Denton. "You picked the wrong town to pass through," he said, eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. I said nothing, which seemed to irritate him more than any response would have. 20 years in the Bureau had taught me when to speak and when silence was the sharper weapon. We pulled into the South Haven Sheriff's Department, a squat, beige building with a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. It looked more like a rural processing facility than a place of justice. Through the window, I saw another cruiser pull in behind us. Teresa was in the back, her head bowed. Denton yanked me from the car and marched me through a side entrance. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed like angry wasps, casting everyone in a sickly pallor. The booking area smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. "Got ourselves an uppity Fed who thinks his badge gives him special rights in our town," Denton announced to the room. Several officers looked up from their desks. I counted 5 in total, mentally photographing each face, each nameplate. Officer Wilkins, a heavy-set man with thinning hair. Sergeant Rollins, whose eyes never quite met mine. Deputy Ellis, who smirked as she looked me up and down. "Empty your pockets," ordered the booking officer, a pinch-faced woman whose badge read Morris. "My wallet contains my FBI credentials," I said calmly. "I need to make a phone call to my field office immediately." Morris laughed. "Honey, you'll get your call when we decide you get your call." They took everything, my wallet, keys, phone, even my wedding ring. Each item disappeared into a plastic property bag, which Morris tossed carelessly into a drawer without logging. "Spread 'em," Denton ordered, kicking my feet apart. The pat-down was deliberately rough, designed to humiliate. I kept my face neutral, even as Denton's hands lingered too long, pressed too hard. "Where's my wife?" I asked when he finished. "Being processed," Denton replied with a smirk that made my blood run cold. They led me to a holding cell that stank of urine and vomit. The concrete bench was stained with substances I didn't want to identify. As the cell door clanged shut, I heard a commotion from the women's booking area. "Don't touch me," Teresa's voice, higher than normal but still controlled. I rushed to the bars. "I'm a federal agent. If anything happens to my wife, You'll what?" The sheriff appeared in the corridor, the same man I'd seen at the gas station. His nameplate read Hayes. "Make threats against officers of the law? That's another charge we can add." He stepped closer, his bulk blocking the fluorescent light. "Director Reynolds." "Yes, I know exactly who you are. That's why you're here." A chill ran through me. This wasn't random. They'd been waiting for us. "My wife needs medical attention," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Hayes studied me, then nodded to someone out of sight. "Put Mrs. Reynolds in cell 3 and get her some ice for that face." Face? What had they done to her face? The next 4 hours were psychological torture. I sat motionless on that filthy bench, counting seconds, memorizing the shift changes, the names called over the intercom, the procedures I could observe from my cell. Every detail was ammunition. Finally, well after midnight, Hayes returned with a deputy I hadn't seen before. "Seems there was a misunderstanding," Hayes said, his tone falsely apologetic. "You're free to go." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, the words like ash in my mouth. "These things happen." He shrugged. "Your property's at the front desk. Your vehicle's been returned to the gas station where this unfortunate incident began." The deputy unlocked my cell. I stepped out, standing tall despite my stiffness. "And my wife?" "Being processed out now." I was escorted to the front desk where Morris returned my belongings with the same careless attitude she'd shown when taking them. I checked everything. My credentials were still there, but something felt off about my phone. I'd have it checked for spyware later. As I signed the release papers, Teresa emerged from a side door. My heart nearly stopped. Her left cheek was swollen, a dark bruise forming under her eye. Her blouse was torn at the collar, but it was the look in her eyes that gutted me. A wounded dignity, a quiet fury that matched my own. I crossed to her in 3 strides, gently taking her face in my hands. "What did they do to you?" "I'm okay," she whispered, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Hayes watched us from the doorway of his office, that same satisfied smile playing at his lips. "Y'all drive safe now. Long way back to D.C. Outside, the night air felt like freedom, but I knew better. True freedom would only come with justice. I held Teresa close as we walked away from the station, her body finally giving in to the tremors she'd been suppressing. "They said I resisted," she murmured against my chest. "When I asked for a lawyer, the female officer said I was being difficult." She slapped me, Marcus, like it was nothing. White-hot rage surged through me, but I kept my voice steady. "I need you to remember every detail, every name, every face. Can you do that for me?" She pulled back, her eyes meeting mine with a fierceness that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her 20 years ago. Already memorized. Under the harsh glare of the parking lot lights, I made her a promise. "They think this ends tonight. They think we'll drive away and never look back." I brushed a tear from her bruised cheek. "But they have no idea who they're dealing with. This town, these people, they're about to learn exactly who I am and what I can do." Teresa nodded, her hand finding mine. "Make them pay." Not just pay, I said, looking back at the sheriff's department one last time. I'm going to dismantle this entire operation. By the time I'm done, South Haven won't even exist on a map. We drove 30 miles before I felt safe enough to stop. The Blue Moon Motel sat just off the highway, a low-slung L-shaped building with flickering neon and peeling paint. Not our usual accommodations, but anonymity mattered more than comfort tonight. Wait in the car, I told Teresa, squeezing her hand before heading to the office. The night clerk barely looked up from his magazine as I paid cash for room 14 at the far end of the building. No security cameras that I could see. A blessing for once. Inside the room, Teresa headed straight for the shower while I pulled the heavy curtains closed and swept the room for bugs. Old habits. The place was clean, just depressingly dated with its faded floral bedspread and wood-paneled walls. When Teresa emerged, her wet hair framing her bruised face, something inside me broke a little more. I should take you to a hospital, I said. She shook her head. No records. Nothing they can trace. She sat on the edge of the bed, wincing slightly. Besides, we both know this isn't about my injuries. She was right. This was about something much bigger than us now. I pulled out my backup phone, the one not issued by the Bureau, the one that couldn't be easily tracked. Only 3 people had this number, and I was about to call one of them. Jack, I said when he answered on the second ring. It's Marcus. Jesus, man, do you know what time it is? His voice was thick with sleep, but I could hear him sitting up, getting alert. Jack Pearson had been my partner for 7 years before I moved up the ladder. Now, he headed the Bureau's Internal Affairs Division and was the only person I trusted completely. I need you to listen carefully, I said, keeping my voice low despite the sweep. Teresa and I were detained by local law enforcement in South Haven County. It wasn't random. They were waiting for us. What? Are you both okay? I glanced at Teresa, who was gingerly applying ice to her cheek. Number they assaulted her, tased her during the stop, and a female officer struck her while she was in custody. Jack swore softly. Tell me what you need. Information. Sheriff's name is Hayes. I need everything. Personnel files, complaint histories, financial records, not just on him, but the entire department. And I need to know who's pulling his strings, because someone tipped him off about who I am. This is about your confirmation hearing, isn't it? Jack asked. Someone's trying to intimidate you before the vote. The thought had crossed my mind. My appointment as FBI director had ruffled feathers, especially after I'd promised to clean house and refocus the Bureau on domestic terrorism and police corruption. Maybe, I admitted, but this feels local and personal too. There's something rotten in this county. Give me 24 hours, Jack said. And Marcus? This conversation never happened. We're off books until we know who we can trust. Understood. Where are you now? Somewhere safe, I lied. No one needed to know our exact location, not even Jack. Stay invisible, he advised. I'll reach out through the secure channel when I have something. After we hung up, I sat beside Teresa on the bed. She leaned against me, her breathing slow and measured. Jack's on it, I told her. Good. She closed her eyes. What's our next move? We start our own investigation. First light, we find out everything we can about Sheriff Hayes and his operation. And tonight we rest. I kissed her forehead gently. You need it. She nodded, too exhausted to argue. Within minutes, she was asleep, her face finally peaceful despite the bruising. I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the small desk by the window, making notes on the motel stationery, mapping out what we knew and what we needed to find out. The anger that had been building since the traffic stop was transforming now, crystallizing into something cold and focused. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Around 3 a.m., the motel phone rang. I froze, staring at it. Nobody knew we were here. I'd paid cash, used a false name. It rang again. Teresa stirred but didn't wake. On the third ring, I picked up, saying nothing. Silence on the other end. Just breathing slow and deliberate. Who is this? I finally asked. The breathing continued for another few seconds. Then the line went dead. I immediately checked the windows, the door. Everything was secure, but my pulse was racing. They'd found us already. But how? I woke Teresa gently. We need to move. What's wrong? She asked, instantly alert despite her exhaustion. Someone knows we're here. I was already packing our few belongings. We can't stay. The phone call? I nodded. No one spoke, but the message was clear enough. We were out of the room in under 5 minutes. I left the key in the door and drove us away with the headlights off until we reached the highway. Where to now? Teresa asked, her voice steady despite everything. I checked the time. 3:27 a.m. We keep moving until daylight. Then we start digging. As we drove through the darkness, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. Someone wanted to scare us off, but they'd made a critical error. They'd shown their hand too early. That silent phone call was meant to intimidate us, but instead, it had given me a flicker of hope. If they were watching us this closely, they were worried. And people only worry when they have something to lose. They made a mistake, I said, more to myself than to Teresa. How so? They're playing defense now, and defense only works if your opponent doesn't know your weaknesses. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind already racing ahead to our next move. The game had begun, and despite the danger, I finally felt like we had a chance. We found a small motel 30 miles outside of town and crashed for a few hours. I woke before dawn, my mind already racing. The silent phone call kept replaying in my head. They knew where we were, which meant they had resources, and that made them dangerous. My secure phone buzzed at 6:17 a.m. It was Jack. I've got something, he said without preamble. Can you meet? Where and when? County Library, 9 o'clock, reference section. We'll be there. I hung up and gently woke Teresa. Her eyes fluttered open, momentarily confused before yesterday's events came rushing back. Jack found something, I told her. We're meeting him at the library in a couple hours. She nodded, wincing as she sat up. The taser marks on her skin had darkened overnight. How are you feeling? I asked. Like I've been hit by a truck, she admitted. But I'll manage. We showered, dressed, and left the motel without checking out. I paid cash for breakfast at a truck stop where no one gave us a second glance. By 8:45, we were pulling into the county library parking lot. Stay alert, I told Teresa. If anything feels off, I know, she said, squeezing my hand. I've got your back. The library was nearly empty. We made our way to the reference section where Jack was already waiting, dressed like a local in jeans and a faded flannel shirt. His FBI credentials were nowhere in sight. You look like hell, he said when he saw us. Feel worse, I replied. He nodded toward a study room in the back. In there, I've swept it. Once inside with the door closed, Jack pulled out a laptop and a thick folder. You've stepped in at this time, Marcus, he said, his voice low. This county has been running a racket for years. What kind of racket? The worst kind. He opened the folder. Drug plants, falsified arrests, civil asset forfeiture. They've been targeting outsiders passing through, especially minorities, then charging them with possession or intent to distribute. My stomach tightened. Let me guess. The sheriff's department keeps the seized assets. Bingo. Jack turned the laptop toward me. Last year alone, they confiscated over $2 million in cash and property. Only a fraction ever made it into official records. I leaned forward, scanning the spreadsheet on screen. Where did you get this? I called in a favor from Cyber. They've been monitoring unusual patterns in civil forfeiture for a task force. This county lit up like a Christmas tree. Teresa pointed to a column of names. These are all the arresting officers? Yes, Jack confirmed. Notice anything? I studied the list. The same 5 names appeared over and over, including the deputy who'd pulled us over. They're working together, I said, a team. And guess who signs off on every single case? Jack flipped to another document. There it was, Sheriff Hayes' signature on dozens of reports, the same cold-eyed man who'd watched from the shadows as I was cuffed and humiliated. He's running the whole operation, I said, anger building in my chest. That's not all. Jack pulled out more papers. I dug into the court records. Judge Martin Dawes presides over 98% of these cases. The conviction rate is nearly 100%. The judge is in on it too, Teresa whispered. It gets worse, Jack continued. Most defendants never even get a public defender. They're pressured to plead guilty to lesser charges to avoid maximum sentences. And meanwhile, their assets are already gone, I finished. Exactly. By the time they're processed, their cash, vehicles, sometimes even property has been absorbed into the department's discretionary fund. I felt sick. How many people? Jack's expression darkened. Over the past 5 years, at least 300 documented cases. God knows how many went completely off the books. Jesus, I muttered. For the next several hours, we pored over the evidence Jack had compiled. The pattern was unmistakable. Travelers pulled over for minor infractions or no reason at all. Drugs discovered during searches. Threats and intimidation to force confessions. Assets seized and distributed among the department. It was nearly 5 p.m. when I finally sat back, my eyes burning from staring at documents all day. This isn't just a few corrupt cops, I said. This is systemic. The entire local justice system is rotten to the core. Jack nodded grimly. And now they've messed with the wrong person. What's our next move? Teresa asked. I looked at the faces in the arrest photos. People who'd been victimized by the very system meant to protect them. People like us, whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. We need more, I decided. Testimonies from victims, bank records showing where the money really went, and we need to identify everyone involved. That won't be easy, Jack warned. These people protect their own. Then we'll have to be smarter than them. I gathered the documents, my resolve hardening. They've been operating in the shadows for years. It's time to drag them into the light. As we prepared to leave, I took one last look at the evidence spread before us. This wasn't just about what had happened to Teresa and me anymore. This was about hundreds of lives destroyed by corruption and greed. We're going to take them all down, I said quietly. Every last one of them. I rubbed my tired eyes and checked my watch. 2:14 a.m. We'd been at this for nearly 20 hours straight, fueled by gas station coffee and righteous anger. The motel room had transformed into our makeshift command center. Laptop screens casting blue light across the walls, papers covering every surface, and empty food containers piled in the corner. The body cam footage is our smoking gun, I said, pushing back from the desk. If we can get the video from when they pulled us over, we've got irrefutable evidence of misconduct. Jack nodded, typing rapidly. I'm requesting it now through the FBI database. All police departments with body cameras upload their footage to central servers. Even if they've lost the local copies, the backups should still exist. Teresa sat on the edge of the bed, applying another ice pack to her shoulder where the taser barbs had left angry red marks. Will they know someone's accessing the files? Not if I do it right, Jack replied. I'm using credentials from our technical division. It'll look like routine maintenance. I paced the small room, stretching my back. The adrenaline that had carried me through the day was fading, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion and a throbbing headache where my face had hit the hood of our car. Got it, Jack announced. I'm in the system. We gathered around his laptop as he navigated through folders of police data. Let's see. Riverdale County Sheriff's Department. Body cam archives. Yesterday's date. His voice trailed off as he clicked through several more screens. That's strange. What is it? I leaned closer. The files should be here, but... He scrolled up and down. There's nothing from yesterday between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. That can't be right, Teresa said. Check again. Jack's fingers flew across the keyboard. I'm running a search for any files uploaded from the badge numbers we identified. After a moment, he shook his head. Nothing. It's like those 4 hours never happened. The familiar burn of anger rekindled in my chest. They erased it. They knew exactly what they did and they're covering their tracks. But that's impossible, Jack protested. These systems have redundancies. Even if they deleted local copies, the automatic uploads should still exist on the federal servers. Unless someone with high-level access purged those too, I said grimly. Jack's expression darkened. That would require administrative privileges. We're talking about someone with serious technical capabilities and authorization. I slammed my fist against the desk, making the coffee cups jump. Damn it. Without that footage, it's their word against ours. Teresa placed her hand on my shoulder. We still have the other evidence, the pattern of arrests, the financial records. It's not enough, I said. We need something concrete that shows exactly what happened to us. Something they can't explain away. Jack continued searching through the database, but I could tell from his expression it was futile. Someone had systematically removed any trace of our encounter with the Riverdale County Sheriff's Department. I stepped outside to clear my head, the cool night air a welcome relief after hours in the stuffy motel room. The parking lot was empty, except for our rental car and Jack's nondescript sedan. Across the street, the gas station where everything had started glowed in the darkness, a lone attendant visible through the windows. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Unknown number. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. We hadn't told anyone where we were staying. No one should know this number except Jack and Teresa. Instead of a call, a text message appeared. I have what you're looking for. Meet me alone. My pulse quickened. I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who wants to help. I have the body cam footage from your arrest. Central Park, North Bench, 1 hour. Come alone or I won't show." I glanced back at the motel room where Jack and Teresa were still working. This could be a trap, but if someone really had the footage we needed? I texted back, "How do I know this is legitimate?" 3 dots appeared, then, "Officer Daniels, badge number 4572. Taser deployed at 5:47 p.m. You showed FBI credentials at 5:49 p.m. Enough proof?" My breath caught. Those were details only someone who had seen the footage would know. I made my decision and replied, "I'll be there." Going back inside, I found Jack still hunched over his laptop. "Any luck?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. He shook his head. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The files are completely gone." I nodded, trying to appear disappointed while my mind raced. "I need some air. Going to take a walk and clear my head." Teresa looked up, concerned. "Want company?" "No," I said, perhaps too quickly. "You should rest that shoulder. I won't be long." Jack barely looked up, engrossed in his digital forensics. "Take your phone, and be careful." "Always am," I replied, grabbing my jacket. As I stepped back into the night, I checked the time. 45 minutes to make the meeting. I had no idea who I was going to meet or what I might be walking into, but if there was even a chance they had the footage we needed, I had to take it. I started the car and pulled out of the motel parking lot, constantly checking my mirrors for any sign of surveillance. The stakes had just gotten higher, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Central Park was deserted at this hour, the playground equipment casting long shadows under the sparse lamplight. I parked a block away and approached on foot, scanning for any sign of surveillance or an ambush. My years in the bureau had taught me to trust my instincts, and right now they were screaming caution. The north bench sat beneath an ancient oak tree partially obscured from the street. Perfect for a clandestine meeting, or a trap. I circled the area twice before approaching, hand resting near my concealed weapon. No one was there. I checked my watch, 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes early. I sat on the bench, positioning myself with clear sightlines in all directions, and waited. At exactly midnight, I heard footsteps approaching from behind the playground. A slender figure emerged from the shadows. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, with her hood pulled tight around her face. She walked with quick, nervous steps, constantly looking over her shoulder. "Are you him?" she asked in a whisper, keeping her distance. "The FBI man?" I nodded once. "I got your text. You said you have something for me." She glanced around again before stepping closer. In the dim light, I could see she was trembling. "My name's Melissa," she said, her voice barely audible. "I work in the sheriff's department. I'm his niece." My muscles tensed involuntarily. The sheriff's niece. This could still be a setup. "Why would you help me?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Her eyes darted up to meet mine, then away again. Because what they did to you and your wife was wrong, and it's not the first time. She reached into her pocket and I instinctively shifted my weight, ready to move. But she only pulled out a small thumb drive, clutching it so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I make copies sometimes," she whispered. "When I think something isn't right. I'm just a clerk in records, but I have access to the uploads before they get processed." "And you have our footage?" I asked, trying to keep the urgency from my voice. She nodded, her hand still gripping the drive. "I saw what happened. I saw them tase your wife for no reason. I saw you show your badge. I saw everything." "Why would you risk this?" I pressed. "He's your uncle." Melissa's lips tightened. "Family doesn't mean you look the other way when people get hurt." "My uncle ... She paused, swallowing hard. "He's not the man people think he is." She held out the thumb drive, her hand shaking so badly I had to steady it with my own. "It's all there," she said. "The original footage from Officer Daniels' body cam. The sheriff ordered it deleted from the system the next morning, but I'd already made a copy." I took the drive, feeling its weight in my palm. Small, yet potentially powerful enough to bring down the entire department. "You need to understand," she continued, voice quavering. "This isn't just about what happened to you. There's a pattern. They target outsiders, especially..." She hesitated. "Especially black people passing through," I finished for her. She nodded, shame coloring her features. "They plant evidence, make arrests. The fines and seizures fund their operation. My uncle calls it taxation for using our roads." My jaw tightened. "How long has this been going on?" "Years, maybe decades. Nobody ever fights back. They're too scared or they can't afford to, but you..." She looked up at me with a flicker of hope. "You're different. You have power they don't know about." I pocketed the drive. "Melissa, what you're doing is brave, but it's also dangerous. Once I use this, they'll know someone on the inside helped me." "I know," she whispered. "I've thought about leaving, but this town, it's all I know. And someone needs to stand up to them." I was about to ask her more when she suddenly stiffened, eyes widening as she looked past my shoulder. "Headlights," she hissed. "A patrol car, they shouldn't be here this time of night." I turned to see a vehicle slowly cruising down the street bordering the park, its spotlight sweeping across the grounds. "Did anyone follow you?" I asked sharply. "No, I was careful, I swear." Panic edged her voice. "But my uncle has people everywhere. Someone might have seen me leave." The patrol car slowed as it approached the park entrance. "You need to go," I said. "Now, is there another way out?" She nodded. "Through the woods behind the playground. It connects to the next street." "Go. I'll create a distraction if needed." Melissa took a step back, then hesitated. "What will happen to them?" "To my uncle." "Justice," I said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." She nodded once, then turned and disappeared into the darkness beyond the playground. I moved in the opposite direction, walking casually toward my car, as if I were just a late-night stroller. The patrol car's spotlight swept over me briefly before continuing its arc across the park. My hand closed around the thumb drive in my pocket. Evidence. Real, undeniable evidence of what they'd done to us, and apparently to countless others before. The key piece we needed to bring this whole corrupt system crashing down. Now I just had to get back to the motel without being followed. I kept my pace measured as I walked away from the park, fighting the urge to run. The patrol car's spotlight swept back toward me, lingering a moment too long. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned casually down a side street, then ducked between two houses, cutting through backyards until I reached the parallel road. Only when I was 3 blocks away did I circle back toward my rental car, parked strategically away from the meeting spot. I checked my surroundings twice before sliding into the driver's seat, the thumb drive burning a hole in my pocket. The drive back to the motel felt endless. Every set of headlights in my rearview mirror sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. I took 3 unnecessary turns and doubled back once to ensure I wasn't being followed. When I finally pulled into the motel parking lot, I killed the engine and sat in darkness for 5 full minutes, scanning for anything suspicious. The neon vacancy sign buzzed and flickered, casting an eerie red glow across the nearly empty lot. Nothing seemed out of place. I slipped into our room using the key card. My wife was asleep, her breathing still uneven from the lingering effects of the taser. The marks on her neck were turning a sickly yellow-purple. My throat tightened at the sight. I set up my laptop at the small desk by the window, positioning myself so I could keep an eye on both my wife and the parking lot. The thumb drive felt impossibly small for something that might contain such damning evidence. "What did you find?" My wife's voice, thick with sleep, startled me. "I thought you were asleep," I said, turning to her. She pushed herself up against the headboard. "I was trying to. What's that?" "Body cam footage. The sheriff's niece made a copy before they deleted it." Her eyes widened. "She gave it to you? Just like that?" "She wants this to stop as much as we do." I plugged in the drive. "Go back to sleep. You need rest." "I need to see it," she said firmly. I hesitated. "Are you sure? It won't be easy to watch." "I lived it," she reminded me. "I can watch it." I nodded and pulled my chair closer to the bed so we could both see the screen. The drive contained several files. I clicked on the one time-stamped with our encounter. The footage began with Officer Daniels approaching our car, his hand already on his weapon. The camera captured everything from his perspective, his quickened breathing, the way he immediately focused on me rather than my wife in the passenger seat. "Got me a fancy car with out-of-state plates," his voice came through clearly. "Let's see what we got here." My stomach churned as I watched him approach, saw his hand yank open my wife's door without warning. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he barked. On screen, my wife's confusion was evident. "Excuse me? What's happening?" I said, "Get out of the damn car." His voice rose sharply. Then came the moment that had replayed in my nightmares. My wife, still seatbelted in, asking a simple question. "Sir, what have we done?" The officer's response made my blood freeze. "You black folks always gotta question everything, don't you?" He reached for his taser. I said, "Get out." Before she could even unbuckle, he fired. The camera captured her body convulsing, her scream cutting through the night air. Beside me on the bed, my wife flinched, her hand unconsciously going to her neck where the barbs had struck her. The footage continued, showing me bursting from the driver's side, FBI credentials in hand, shouting my position. The officer's response was immediate and vicious. "I don't give a damn if you're the president," he snarled, using a racial slur that made my wife gasp beside me. "Face down on the hood now." The camera captured him slamming me against our car, the gleam of handcuffs, and then, there it was, the sheriff stepping out from the shadows of the gas station, a satisfied smile on his face. "Good work, Daniels," he said clearly. "I'll take it from here." I paused the video, my hands shaking with rage. "They planned it," my wife whispered. "They saw us coming and they planned it." I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. After several deep breaths, I continued playing the footage, watching our humiliation through the officer's eyes. Every racial slur, every unnecessary shove, every moment of our dignity being stripped away, all captured in high definition. When it finally ended, we sat in silence. "This is enough, isn't it?" my wife finally asked. "To bring charges?" "More than enough," I confirmed, ejecting the drive and securing it in my lockbox. "But we need to move fast. They know someone helped us by now." I checked my watch. Just 3 days until my public introduction as the new FBI director. 3 days until I would stand before cameras and officially take my position. A position these backwater racists had no idea I held when they decided to terrorize us. 3 days, I said aloud. "That's our window to gather everything we need. Once my appointment goes public, they'll destroy whatever evidence remains." My wife reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. "What's our next move?" I looked back at the screen, the frozen image of the sheriff's smirking face fueling my resolve. "We build an airtight case," I said. "Every officer involved, every falsified report, every victim before us. We're going to dismantle their entire operation." I closed the laptop. The image of my wife's suffering burned into my mind. The clock was ticking. 3 days to prepare the case that would bring justice not just for us, but for everyone who'd been victimized by this corrupt department. 3 days until the sheriff learned exactly who he had messed with. I spent the next morning carefully compiling everything we'd gathered. The body cam footage was our smoking gun, but I needed more. A comprehensive picture of the corruption. My wife stayed in our motel room, recovering and helping me organize our findings. We'd told the motel clerk we were travel writers researching small-town America, a cover that gave us reason to ask questions without raising alarms. "I'm heading out to meet with that former deputy," I told my wife, kissing her forehead. "Back in a couple hours." She nodded, her eyes still showing traces of fear. "Be careful. They're watching." "Always am," I assured her, though the weight of her words settled uncomfortably in my chest. I drove to a diner 30 miles outside town where I'd arranged to meet James Wilkins, a deputy who'd been fired last year after questioning the sheriff's practices. He sat in the back booth, cap pulled low, fingers nervously tapping on his coffee mug. "Didn't think anyone would ever look into them," he said after I showed him my credentials. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Sheriff runs this county like his personal kingdom, has for 15 years. "Tell me everything," I said, sliding a voice recorder between us. For the next hour, Wilkins detailed a systematic operation of planted evidence, targeted harassment of minorities passing through town, and kickbacks from local businesses. The sheriff had built a network of complicit officers and terrified everyone else into silence. "Why'd you agree to talk to me?" I asked as we finished. Wilkins' eyes hardened. "They ruined my life when I spoke up, lost my job, my house, my reputation. But worse than that," his voice cracked. "They went after my kid, planted drugs in his locker at school. He's 16, got expelled." I felt a familiar rage building. "I'm going to stop them, Mr. Wilkins. You have my word." After leaving the diner, I stopped at a pharmacy to pick up some painkillers for my wife. As I walked back to my rental car, something caught my eye. A black SUV parked across the street, its engine running. I pretended not to notice, but my senses went on high alert. I pulled onto the highway, watching my rearview mirror. The SUV waited 30 seconds, then followed. My heart rate picked up. Could be coincidence. I took the next exit, a route that didn't lead back to our motel. The SUV followed. Definitely not a coincidence. I called my wife. "Don't react when you hear this," I said quietly. "I'm being followed. I need you to gather everything important and be ready to move." "Understood," she replied, her voice steady. She'd been an FBI agent herself before retiring. She knew the drill. I needed to lose the tail without making it obvious I'd spotted them. The town was small, but I'd memorized the layout during our first day, a habit from years of field work. I turned down Main Street, busy with afternoon shoppers, then made a series of quick turns through a residential neighborhood. The SUV stayed with me, maintaining distance but never losing sight. These weren't amateurs. My mind raced through options. I couldn't lead them back to our motel, but I also couldn't just keep driving aimlessly. I needed to confirm who was following me and why. I spotted a shopping center ahead with multiple entrances and a layout that would work to my advantage. I pulled in, driving slowly past storefronts as if looking for a particular shop. In my mirror, I could see the SUV doing the same. I parked near a busy supermarket and went inside, grabbing a basket and pretending to shop while watching the entrance through the large front windows. 2 men exited the SUV. One I recognized immediately, Officer Daniels, the man who'd tased my wife. The other was taller, wearing plain clothes but moving with the unmistakable posture of law enforcement. They entered the store trying to look casual as they scanned for me. I ducked down an aisle, then slipped out a side exit. Instead of returning to my car, I circled around to the back of the shopping center, finding an alley that ran behind the buildings. My heart hammered against my ribs as I moved quickly but deliberately, using the delivery entrances and dumpsters as cover. I needed to get a look at their vehicle up close, confirm if this was official department surveillance or something off the books. I made my way back toward the parking lot, staying in the shadows. Their SUV sat idling, no markings but with a county plate. Through the windshield, I could see a police radio mounted under the dash. This was department equipment, but something told me this wasn't an official operation. My suspicion was confirmed when I heard Daniel's voice as they exited the store, frustrated. "Sheriff wants to know who this guy really is," he said to his partner. "Says he doesn't buy the travel writer story. Something about him seems familiar." The taller man nodded. "We'll find him. Can't have gone far." They were on to me. The clock wasn't just ticking down to my public introduction anymore. It was counting down to when they'd discover exactly who they'd assaulted 3 nights ago. I needed to get back to my wife and move locations immediately. Our investigation had just become significantly more dangerous. I cut down an alley behind a row of shops, heart pounding in my ears. I needed to get back to my wife without leading these goons straight to her. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as I zigzagged through the town, doubling back and checking constantly to make sure I'd lost my tail. When I was certain I was clear, I called my contact at the bureau. "They're on to me," I said without preamble when he answered. "How bad?" His voice was tense. "Bad enough. Sheriff's deputies are tailing me. They're suspicious about who I am." "You need to move locations immediately. They'll run your plates, check hotels." "Already planning on it," I said. "I need somewhere secure for my wife. She's still recovering." There was a pause on the line. "There's a place about 40 miles east outside their jurisdiction. Small family-owned hotel, cash only. Owner's an ex-agent who retired there. I'll call ahead. Tell him you're coming." Relief washed through me. "Thanks. I owe you." "Just be careful. These small-town operations can get ugly fast when they're cornered." I hung up and called my wife, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline still coursing through my system. "Pack everything," I told her. "We're moving in 20 minutes." "They found us?" Her voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying fear. "Not yet, but they're looking. I'll explain when I get there." I made one more stop before heading back to our motel, purchasing a burner phone from a convenience store. We couldn't risk using our regular cells anymore. When I pulled into the motel parking lot, I scanned for unfamiliar vehicles. Nothing obvious, but that didn't mean we were safe. I parked around back and entered through a side door, using my keycard to access the hallway. My wife was waiting, our bags already packed. The bruises on her face from the initial assault had faded to a yellowish purple, but she still winced when she moved too quickly. Seeing her pain rekindled my rage, but I pushed it down. I needed to focus. "We have a safe place to go," I explained as I helped her with the bags. "About 40 minutes from here, we'll take back roads." She nodded, trusting me completely. That trust felt like both a blessing and a burden. We loaded the car quickly, and I did one final sweep of the room to make sure we hadn't left anything behind. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I kept checking my mirrors, hyper-aware of every vehicle around us. "Talk to me," my wife said, recognizing my tension. "What happened?" I explained about the tale, about Daniels and his partner searching for me in the store. "They're getting nervous," she said, "and that's good, right? Means we're getting close to something." "Or it means they're desperate," I replied. "And desperate men are dangerous." We drove in silence for a while, taking a circuitous route out of town. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. About 15 minutes into our drive on a stretch of road bordered by dense woods, I noticed headlights appear behind us, closing fast. "We've got company," I said, my grip tightening on the wheel. My wife turned to look. Could be nothing. Maybe. But my instincts were screaming. The vehicle behind us, a dark pickup truck, suddenly accelerated, coming right up on our bumper. Its high beams flashed on, blinding me through the rearview mirror. "Hold on," I warned, pressing the accelerator. The rental car surged forward, but the truck stayed with us. Then it rammed us from behind. The impact jolted us forward. My wife cried out as her seatbelt locked, pressing against her still tender ribs. "Are you okay?" I asked, struggling to keep the car on the road. "Just drive," she gasped. I pushed the car harder, but the rental wasn't built for speed. The truck rammed us again, harder this time. Our car fishtailed, tires squealing as I fought for control. Up ahead, I saw a second vehicle pull onto the road, blocking our path. It was the black SUV from earlier. "They're boxing us in," I said, mind racing through options. There was a turnoff about a quarter-mile ahead, if we could reach it. The truck hit us a third time. Our car spun, tires losing traction. We slid off the road and down a shallow embankment, coming to a jarring stop against a tree. The impact deployed the airbags. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard car doors slamming, footsteps approaching. "Stay in the car," I told my wife, unholstering my service weapon from my ankle. "Lock the doors." I pushed my door open against the deflating airbag and staggered out. 3 men approached, all wearing ski masks. One I recognized by his build as Daniel's. They hadn't expected me to be armed. I saw the surprise in their eyes when I raised my weapon. "Federal agent," I shouted, "on the ground now." Instead of complying, they scattered. One drew a gun. I fired a warning shot, and he ducked behind the truck. The other two circled, trying to flank me. I heard glass breaking behind me. Someone was trying to get to my wife through the passenger window. I spun around just as a masked figure reached in to grab her. She fought back, but she was still weak from her previous injuries. I heard her cry out in pain. Rage took over. I charged the man, tackling him away from the car. We hit the ground hard, rolling down the embankment. My gun went flying from my hand. He was bigger than me, but I had decades of training and a fury that made my strikes precise and devastating. I heard shouting, more footsteps. The other men were coming. I knocked my attacker unconscious with an elbow strike, then scrambled back up toward the car. I was too late. They dragged my wife out. She was on the ground, unmoving. "Get away from her," I roared, retrieving my weapon and firing at their feet. They scattered again, running back to their vehicles. Engines roared to life, and they sped away, leaving us behind. I rushed to my wife's side. Blood pooled beneath her head where it had struck the ground. She wasn't responding to my voice. "No, no, no," I whispered, checking her pulse. It was there, but weak. I pulled out the burner phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. "My wife needs an ambulance," I said, giving our location. "Head injury. She's unconscious." The wait for the ambulance was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I held her hand, talking to her, begging her to open her eyes. When the paramedics finally arrived, they worked quickly, stabilizing her neck and loading her onto a stretcher. "She's going to be okay," one of them assured me, but I could see the concern in his eyes. At the hospital, they rushed her into emergency surgery. I paced the waiting room, guilt crushing me like a physical weight. I'd done this. My investigation had put her in danger. If I'd been more careful, if I'd moved her to safety sooner. Hours later, a doctor emerged. "Your wife is stable," he said, "but she's still unconscious. The next 24 hours will be critical." I sat by her bedside that night, holding her limp hand, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Machines beeped around us, monitoring her vital signs. Her face was pale, a large bandage wrapped around her head. This was my fault. All of it. And as I sat there, watching the woman I loved fight for her life because of my choices, I made a new vow. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about vengeance. I sat alone in the sterile hospital waiting room, my body hunched forward in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed designed to prevent rest. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly pale glow. My wife had been moved to intensive care after surgery, and visiting hours wouldn't begin for another 2 hours. The doctors had politely but firmly suggested I get some coffee, maybe something to eat. I hadn't moved in 40 minutes. My hands were still stained with traces of her blood. I'd refused to wash them until I knew she would be okay. It was irrational, I knew that, but something in me felt like maintaining this vigil, this penance, was necessary. The waiting room was empty except for me. 3 in the morning wasn't a popular time for hospital visits. The only sounds were the distant squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum and the occasional ding of the elevator down the hall. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I almost didn't check it. What did anything else matter right now? But years of FBI training kicked in. It could be news about the case, something that might help me protect her. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. A text message from an unknown number. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. It was a photo of my wife. Not just any photo, one taken earlier today. before the attack. She was walking from our motel room to the car, looking over her shoulder at something. The image was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. But what made my hands shake was the crude addition: bright red crosshairs centered perfectly over her heart. Below the image was a simple caption, "Next time, no warning." I stared at it, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. My training told me to analyze, to think clearly. The photo had been taken from across the street from our motel, probably from a parked vehicle. The person who took it had been watching us, waiting, planning. The message came in from a local number. I memorized it instantly, though I knew it would likely be a burner phone, untraceable. Another text arrived seconds later. From the desk of Sheriff James Mercer. The bastard hadn't even bothered to hide his identity. Why would he? In this town, he was untouchable. He owned the police, the courts, probably half the businesses. And now, he was letting me know exactly how vulnerable we were. I felt something cold and hard settle in my gut. Not just fear, but a crystallizing rage. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing steadied. I stood up and walked to the window, scanning the parking lot below. Were they watching me even now? Probably. The sheriff wanted me to know I was being watched, wanted me afraid, looking over my shoulder, distracted. I took a screenshot of the messages, then forwarded them to my FBI contact secure email. Evidence. Then I deleted the texts from my phone. A nurse walked by, glancing at me with professional concern. "Sir, can I get you anything?" I realized how I must look. A tall black man with blood-stained hands, staring out the window with murder in his eyes. "I'm fine," I said, forcing my face to relax. "Just waiting on news about my wife." She nodded sympathetically and continued down the hall. I returned to my seat, mind racing. The sheriff had just made a critical mistake. Threats against a federal officer, and explicit ones at that, were serious crimes. But more importantly, he'd confirmed what I already suspected. He was personally involved in the attack on my wife. This wasn't just some deputies acting on their own. This went straight to the top. I pulled out my burner phone and called my FBI contact. "Yeah?" he answered on the first ring. "It's me," I said quietly. "The sheriff just sent me a death threat. A photo of my wife with crosshairs drawn over it." A low whistle from the other end. "You're sure it's from him?" "He signed it, wants me to know exactly who I'm dealing with." That's bold or stupid. He thinks he's untouchable. That's what we're going to use against him. "Your wife, how is she?" I swallowed hard. Still unconscious, but stable. "I'm sorry, man." He paused. "What do you need?" "Protection for her. Someone I can trust. Not local law enforcement. I'll have 2 agents there within the hour. Federal marshals, not FBI. Less connection to you." "Thank you," I hesitated. "And I need to accelerate the timeline. We move tomorrow." "That's fast, you sure?" "They tried to kill my wife tonight. Next time they won't miss. I'm not giving them another chance." A long pause. "All right, I'll make the calls. Be careful." I hung up and stared at the wall, the sheriff's threat burning in my mind. The cold steel of fear in my gut had transformed into something harder, something sharper. In trying to scare me off, the sheriff had just given me exactly what I needed. Concrete evidence linking him directly to the attacks. He thought he was sending a message of power. Instead, he'd handed me the key to his destruction. I looked at my watch. 1 hour and 40 minutes until visiting hours. 1 hour and 40 minutes to plan how I was going to bring down an entire corrupt system. And I would bring it down, for my wife, for justice, for every person they'd ever hurt in this town. The sheriff had no idea what he'd just unleashed. I sat by my wife's hospital bed, watching her chest rise and fall with each shallow breath. The doctors had assured me she would recover physically, but the haunted look I'd seen in her eyes before the ambush, that might never heal. Tubes and wires connected her to machines that beeped with mechanical indifference. Her beautiful face was swollen, bruised on one side where she'd hit the pavement. This was my fault, all of it. I'd dragged her into this crusade for justice. My pride, my position, my determination to make things right. What had it gotten us? Her, lying broken in a hospital bed. Me, jumping at shadows, waiting for the sheriff's men to finish what they'd started. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, taking her hand gently between mine. "I should have protected you better." The weight of my failure pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. What was I thinking? Trying to take on an entire corrupt system by myself. These people had no boundaries, no limits to what they would do. They'd already shown that. I pulled out my phone and began searching for flights. We needed to get out of here, today if possible. I could arrange medical transport for my wife. We'd go somewhere safe, somewhere far from this poisonous little town. I'd call in every favor, use every resource at my disposal to make it happen. Justice wasn't worth her life, nothing was. I was so absorbed in my planning that I didn't hear the hospital room door open. "Running away, Director?" The voice hit me like a bucket of ice water. I knew that gravelly tone anywhere. I turned to find John Redmond standing in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. At 72, he still looked like he could take down men half his age. His silver hair was cropped short, military style, and his piercing gray eyes missed nothing. "John," I said, stunned. "What are you doing here?" He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Got a call that one of my best trainees was about to throw in the towel. Thought I'd see for myself if it was true." "You don't understand. I understand plenty." He cut me off, pulling up a chair on the other side of my wife's bed. "I understand that these backwater thugs put your wife in the hospital. I understand you're scared, and I understand you're about to make the biggest mistake of your career." I felt a flash of anger. "This isn't about my career. This is about her safety." John's eyes softened slightly as he looked at my wife. "How is she?" "Stable. They expect her to wake up soon." I swallowed hard. "But they'll try again, John. The sheriff sent me a death threat with her photo." "And you think running will solve that?" John leaned forward. "You think a man like that, once he's targeted you, will just let you walk away? That he won't follow you, won't make an example of you?" I hadn't thought of that. The realization must have shown on my face. "These types," John continued, "they don't stop. You show weakness, they pursue. You run, they hunt. The only language they understand is strength and consequences." "I can't risk her life again," I said, my voice breaking slightly. John was quiet for a moment, studying me with those penetrating eyes that had seen too much in his decades with the Bureau. "Remember why you joined the FBI?" he finally asked. I nodded slowly. "To protect people who couldn't protect themselves." "And why I recommended you for director?" "Because you said I never backed down from a fight that mattered." "This fight matters." John's voice was steel now. "Not just for you and your wife, for every person in this town who's been stepped on, framed, abused by these corrupt bastards. You walk away now. You're abandoning them all." His words hit me like physical blows. I knew he was right, but the fear for my wife was paralyzing. "What would you have me do?" I asked. "I can't lose her." "And you won't." John reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive. "Your team's been busy. This contains everything we need to take down not just the sheriff, but the entire network. Financial records, falsified evidence, testimony from 3 deputies willing to flip." I stared at the drive. "How did you—" "I've still got connections," he said with a thin smile. "And people respect you more than you know. They want to help." He placed the drive on the bedside table between us. "The question is, are you still the man I trained? The one who knows that sometimes you have to stand your ground even when you're afraid?" His eyes bored into mine. "Or are you going to let these small-town tyrants win?" I looked from John to my wife, feeling the weight of the decision. Running might keep us safe for now, but for how long? And what message would it send to others like the sheriff? "She wouldn't want you to run," John said softly, following my gaze. "She married a fighter, not a man who backs down when things get tough." Something stirred in my chest, a familiar heat I'd almost forgotten in my fear, righteous anger, determination, purpose. "You're right," I said, straightening my shoulders. "We finish this." John's face broke into a rare smile. "There he is. There's the man I know." I picked up the flash drive, feeling its weight in my palm. Tomorrow morning, we move at dawn. That's more like it, John said, standing. I'll make the arrangements. You stay with her tonight. As he reached the door, he turned back. Remember what I always taught you? I nodded, feeling a renewed fire in my heart. Justice isn't just about following the law. It's about making sure the law works for everyone, not just the powerful. Damn right, he said. Now let's go remind this sheriff what real justice looks like. I stayed by my wife's side until the early hours, holding her hand, watching her breathe. The machines beeped steadily, a reassuring rhythm in the quiet hospital room. When her eyes finally fluttered open around 3 a.m., I nearly collapsed with relief. Hey, she whispered, her voice raspy. Hey yourself, I said, fighting back tears. You had me worried. She tried to smile, winced from the pain. What happened? I told her about the ambush, keeping my voice steady despite the rage still simmering beneath my skin. When I finished, she squeezed my hand with surprising strength. You're going to get them, right? She asked. Count on it, I promised. By dawn, John had returned. He nodded respectfully to my wife before pulling me into the hallway to discuss our plan. We need to draw them out, he said, voice low. Make them show their hand in a way we can document. Money, I said immediately. From what we've seen in their financial records, that's their weakness. Greed. John smiled grimly. Exactly what I was thinking. A sting operation. We spent the next hour outlining the details. By 8 a.m., I was on a secure line with my most trusted team members back at headquarters. By noon, 4 undercover agents had arrived in town, each one carefully selected for their experience with corrupt officials. The setup needs to be perfect, I told them as we gathered in a private room at the hospital. These guys are crooked, but they're not stupid. They've been running this town for years. Agent Ramirez, a veteran undercover specialist, nodded. What's our cover story? You're representing a drug distributor looking to move product through their county, John explained. You've heard they can provide protection for the right price. How much are we offering? Asked Agent Chen. I glanced at John. 200,000. Cash. Enough to be tempting, not so much it seems suspicious. And the location? Agent Wilson asked. The abandoned lumber mill at the edge of town, I said. Remote, controllable sight lines, multiple exit points. We'll wire it completely. The team dispersed to prepare while John and I finalized the details. My wife had been moved to a secure floor with 2 agents posted outside her door. She'd be safe while we sprang our trap. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered over the town, matching my mood. A storm was coming, both literally and figuratively. I stood at the window of our temporary command center, watching lightning flash in the distance. Weather might work in our favor, John commented, joining me. Cover any unusual sounds, limit visibility for their lookouts. I nodded, feeling the weight of what we were about to do. What if they don't take the bait? They will, John said confidently. Ramirez made contact an hour ago. The sheriff's deputy practically salivated at the mention of cash. The tech team arrived at dusk, quickly transforming the old lumber mill into a surveillance hub. Hidden cameras covered every angle. Microphones sensitive enough to pick up whispers were embedded in the walls. The money, all marked bills, was arranged in neat stacks inside a metal briefcase. "Com check," the lead technician said, handing me a nearly invisible earpiece. I slipped it in, hearing the reassuring crackle of the secure channel. Testing, testing. "Loud and clear, sir," came the response. Outside, the rain had started, fat drops hammering against the metal roof of the mill. Thunder rolled across the sky as we made final preparations. My heart pounded in rhythm with the storm, adrenaline mixing with determination in my veins. "You ready for this?" John asked, checking his weapon one last time. "I've been ready since they put their hands on my wife," I replied. The plan was straightforward. Agent Ramirez would pose as the drug distributor's representative, offering the sheriff and his deputies the cash in exchange for guaranteed safe passage through their jurisdiction. I would observe from a hidden room with backup teams positioned strategically around the perimeter. "Remember," I told the team during our final briefing, "we need them to explicitly accept the bribe. Get them talking about their operation, their protection racket, anything that ties them directly to corruption. What if they get suspicious? Agent Chen asked. We abort, I said firmly. No heroics. We've got other angles we can work if this falls through. But I knew in my gut this would work. Men like the sheriff had one fatal flaw. They believed themselves untouchable. That arrogance would be their downfall. At exactly 10 p.m., we took our positions. I settled into the observation room with John, watching the multiple camera feeds as rain lashed against the windows. The mill creaked and groaned in the wind, adding to the tension that filled the air. Vehicle approaching, came the alert through my earpiece. Black SUV, matches the sheriff's department issue. I leaned forward, watching the headlights cut through the rain as the vehicle pulled up outside. The sheriff stepped out first, followed by 2 deputies I recognized from the jail. They moved with the confident swagger of men who feared no consequences. Here we go, John murmured beside me. I nodded, feeling a storm brewing inside my chest that matched the one raging outside. Justice was coming, and it would strike like lightning. I watched the monitor intently as the sheriff stomped through the mill's entrance, rainwater streaming off his hat. 2 deputies flanked him, hands hovering near their weapons. A third man, Officer Daniels, who'd tased my wife, brought up the rear, eyes darting nervously around the cavernous space. Quite the weather we're having, Agent Ramirez said smoothly, playing his role to perfection. He stood beside the metal table where the briefcase waited, his posture relaxed but alert. The sheriff grunted, removing his rain-slicked jacket. Let's not waste time on small talk. You said you had a business proposition. My jaw clenched as I heard his voice again, that same drawl that had dismissed my badge and authority days ago. In the dim light of the observation room, John placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. Patience, he whispered. Let them hang themselves. Ramirez smiled thinly. My employer values efficiency in his supply chain. We understand you provide certain assurances for the right price. Depends on what you're moving through my county, the sheriff replied, circling the table like a predator. And how much those assurances are worth to you. 200,000, Ramirez said, flipping open the briefcase to reveal the neatly stacked bills. Monthly, for guaranteed safe passage and advance warning of any federal interest in the area. The sheriff's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the cash. I could almost see the greed taking hold, clouding whatever caution he might have had. One of the deputies let out a low whistle. That's a lot of product you must be moving, the sheriff said, reaching out to touch the money. We're expanding operations, Ramirez replied. My employer needs reliability. Can you provide that? The sheriff chuckled, a cold sound that echoed through the mill. Son, I've been running this county for 20 years. Nothing happens here without my say-so. Federal agents, state police, they all know to stay clear or face consequences. My heart hammered in my chest. He was incriminating himself beautifully. Like that FBI couple last week? Ramirez asked casually. I tensed, leaning closer to the monitor. The sheriff's face split into a cruel smile. Had to teach them a lesson. Man flashed his badge like it meant something here. He laughed, and the deputies joined in. Should have seen his face when we took his wife. That's how we handle feds in my town. White-hot rage surged through me. John's grip on my shoulder tightened. And there's no blowback from that? Ramirez pressed. Please, the sheriff scoffed. We've got judges, prosecutors, even the mayor in our pocket. Been running our operation for years. Drugs, protection, you name it. That's why your boss is smart to come to us. Ramirez nodded, closing the briefcase with a snap. Then I believe we have a deal. The sheriff reached for the case, his fingers closing around the handle. Officer Daniels and the deputies moved closer, already mentally spending their cut. That's when I gave the signal. Move in, I said into my comm. All teams go. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The doors of the mill burst open as SWAT teams poured in from every entrance. The thunder outside was drowned out by shouts of FBI, freeze, hands in the air. The look of shock on the sheriff's face was something I'll treasure forever. One moment he was clutching a briefcase full of cash, the master of his corrupt domain. The next, he was staring down the barrels of a dozen assault rifles, his world crumbling around him. "What the hell is this?" he sputtered as Ramirez drew his weapon. I stepped out from the observation room, FBI windbreaker now clearly visible. The sheriff's eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with hatred. "You!" he growled. "Me," I confirmed, walking steadily toward him as SWAT officers surrounded his men. "Sheriff Michael Lawson, you're under arrest for corruption, extortion, assault on a federal officer, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances." He lunged at me then, all pretense gone, a cornered animal striking out. But he never reached me. 2 SWAT officers tackled him mid-stride, slamming him face first onto the concrete floor. The impact was satisfying, almost as satisfying as watching the cuffs close around his wrists. As they secured him, I crouched down until we were eye to eye. The man who had terrorized this town, who had hurt my wife, who had thought himself untouchable, now lay helpless before me. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed, blood trickling from his split lip. "I own this town." "Not anymore," I replied calmly. Around us, his deputies were being cuffed and read their rights. Officer Daniels struggled against his restraints, shouting obscenities until a SWAT officer firmly pushed his head down. John appeared at my side as the sheriff was hauled to his feet. "We got it all on tape," he said. "Every word. Plus the body cam footage from your traffic stop. They're finished." I nodded, watching as the sheriff was marched toward the exit. Rain continued to pound against the roof, but the storm inside me had begun to calm. This wasn't personal vengeance. It was justice, served cold and by the book. "Sir," a tech agent called from across the room, "media's already picking up chatter about the arrest. It'll be on every channel by morning." The sheriff froze mid-step, his shoulders slumping as the reality of his situation finally hit home. His empire wasn't just threatened, it was over. As our eyes locked one final time, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. The man who had ruled through intimidation was now experiencing it himself. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The badge on my chest said everything. I stood in the shadows outside the old mill, watching as the first media vans arrived. Their headlights cut through the rain-soaked darkness, reporters already jumping out with microphones and cameras at the ready. John appeared at my shoulder, his expression grim but satisfied. "Word travels fast," he muttered. "Especially when we tip them off," I replied, feeling the weight of the flash drive in my pocket. The body cam footage would be in their hands within the hour. The sheriff and his men were being loaded into separate vehicles, their faces illuminated by flashing red and blue lights. I caught a glimpse of the sheriff's expression, rage mixed with disbelief. He'd never imagined this ending, not in his town, not to his empire. "You should get back to the hospital," John said, checking his watch. "We've got this covered." I nodded, my thoughts immediately returning to my wife. "Call me the second anything changes." "Count on it." As I drove through the rain-slick streets toward the hospital, I passed more news vans heading toward the mill. By morning, this sleepy, corrupt town would be the center of a national media firestorm. My wife was sleeping when I entered her hospital room. The bruises on her face had deepened to purple, but her breathing was steady. I sank into the chair beside her bed, took her hand, and finally allowed myself to close my eyes. I woke to the sound of the television. My wife was awake, remote in hand, her eyes fixed on the screen. On it, the sheriff's face glared back at us as a news anchor's voice filled the room. "Breaking news this morning as an FBI sting operation has led to the arrest of Sheriff Michael Lawson and 6 deputies in what authorities are calling one of the most extensive cases of police corruption in recent history." The footage from the body cam played next, unedited, raw, and damning. My wife's hand tightened around mine as we watched her being tased, heard the racial slurs, saw me being slammed against our car. "You did it," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "We did it," I corrected her, kissing her forehead gently. Throughout the day, the story grew. Every news channel ran the footage on loop. Social media exploded. Protesters gathered outside the county jail. By afternoon, the mayor and district attorney had both issued statements distancing themselves from the sheriff, despite evidence suggesting their involvement. John arrived around noon with coffee and sandwiches. "You're not going to believe what the forensic team found," he said, pulling up a chair. "Try me. They cracked the sheriff's encrypted files." John's face darkened. "This goes way beyond drug running and protection rackets. They've been operating a human trafficking ring, using traffic stops to target vulnerable people passing through town." My blood ran cold. "What?" "They'd plant evidence, make arrests, then offer a choice. Face trumped-up charges or disappear into their network. The victims were mostly immigrants, runaways, people who wouldn't be missed or couldn't fight back. I thought of how quickly they'd targeted us, how practiced the whole operation had seemed. How many? At least 30 confirmed cases over the past 5 years. Probably more we haven't found yet." My wife's hand trembled in mine. "That could have been us." "No," I said firmly. "They didn't know who they were dealing with." By evening, the national news had picked up the human trafficking angle. Satellite trucks lined the streets outside the hospital and courthouse. The FBI officially announced a full investigation, and the governor called for a statewide review of rural law enforcement practices. I watched from my wife's hospital room as the forensic accountants appeared on CNN, explaining how they'd traced money through shell companies and offshore accounts. The sheriff hadn't just been corrupt. He'd been the kingpin of an operation that had tentacles reaching into neighboring counties. "We've identified at least 6 figures connected to a series of transactions consistent with human trafficking operations," the lead accountant explained to the camera. "The pattern suggests a sophisticated network operating under the protection of law enforcement." My phone rang continuously with calls from the bureau. The director himself had been briefed. What had started as a personal mission for justice had uncovered something far more sinister than even I had imagined. Around midnight, when the hospital had quieted, John returned with more files. "They're singing like canaries," he said, dropping a stack of preliminary interrogation reports on the bedside table. "The deputies are all turning on each other, trying to cut deals. And the sheriff? Silent. Lawyered up immediately. But it doesn't matter, we've got him dead to rights with the financial records alone." I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The satisfaction of justice served, yes, but also horror at what we'd uncovered. How many lives had been destroyed while this town looked the other way? My wife stirred in her sleep, wincing slightly as she moved. The sight of her bruises rekindled my resolve. "The FBI press conference is tomorrow at 10, John said. "The director wants you front and center." "I'll be there." After John left, I stood at the window, watching as yet another news van pulled up outside. Lights blazed across the hospital parking lot, illuminating the rain. In just 24 hours, we had torn the lid off decades of corruption and evil. The sheriff's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was being exposed for all the world to see. Tomorrow the real work would begin, finding the victims, rebuilding trust, ensuring justice was served completely. But tonight, watching the media swarm like antibodies attacking an infection, I allowed myself to feel the first real sense of peace since we'd pulled into that gas station. The truth was out. And the truth, as they say, will set you free. I stood at the back of the crowded federal courtroom, watching as they brought the sheriff in. Gone was his swagger, his arrogant smirk. The orange jumpsuit swallowed his frame, making him look smaller somehow. His hands were cuffed in front of him, and he kept his eyes fixed on the floor. For a man who'd terrorized an entire county, he suddenly seemed pathetically ordinary. The judge entered, and we all rose. As I sat back down, I caught the sheriff's eye for just a moment. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something I hadn't seen there before. Fear. "All rise. The United States District Court for the Eastern District is now in session. The Honorable Judge Marianne Chen presiding." The arraignment was brutal and efficient. 47 federal charges against the sheriff alone: racketeering, human trafficking, civil rights violations, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and more. His deputies faced similar slates of charges, tailored to their individual crimes. "How do you plead?" the judge asked the sheriff. His attorney started to speak, but the sheriff cut him off. "Not guilty, Your Honor." His voice cracked on the last word. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I felt my wife's hand tighten around mine. "The people request the defendants be held without bail," the federal prosecutor announced. They represent a significant flight risk and danger to the community, particularly potential witnesses. The defense attorneys protested, but Judge Chen was unmoved. Bail denied for all defendants, next hearing set for 2 weeks from today. Outside, the media frenzy had reached fever pitch. Every major network had camera crews stationed on the courthouse steps. As we exited, flashbulbs exploded like lightning. "Director Williams! Director Williams!" Reporters shouted my name, thrusting microphones toward me. It still felt strange to hear my new title. I stepped to the makeshift podium, my wife beside me. The crowd fell silent. "Today marks the beginning, not the end," I began. "The charges filed against Sheriff Randall and his co-conspirators represent one of the most egregious abuses of power I've encountered in my 20-year career with the FBI. What began as a personal injustice," I paused, steadying my voice, "revealed a criminal enterprise operating under the color of law." The cameras clicked and whirred. "I want to be clear. This investigation is ongoing. We believe there are more victims who have not yet been identified, more accomplices who have not yet been charged. If you have information, now is the time to come forward." A reporter raised her hand. "Director Williams, how does it feel to be taking down the same people who assaulted you and your wife?" My wife squeezed my hand again, encouraging me. "This isn't about personal revenge," I said, though part of me knew that wasn't entirely true. "This is about justice, about ensuring that no one is above the law, especially those entrusted to enforce it." Back at our hotel, we watched as the story dominated every channel. CNN showed the sheriff's booking photo next to images of his lavish home being searched by FBI agents. Fox News interviewed former victims, their faces blurred but their stories clear and devastating. MSNBC had assembled a panel of legal experts predicting decades-long sentences. My phone buzzed with a text from John. "Turn on Channel 7. I flipped to the local news to see the sheriff's wife holding a tearful press conference outside their home, now plastered with foreclosure notices. "I knew nothing about my husband's activities," she insisted, mascara streaming down her face. "Me and my children are victims too." The camera pulled back to show their teenage son and daughter, heads bowed in shame, as neighbors watched from their porches with undisguised contempt. "Justice comes in many forms," my wife murmured, watching the scene. The next morning brought more developments. The mayor and district attorney had both been served with subpoenas. 3 judges were under investigation for suspicious rulings in cases connected to the sheriff. The state police had taken over law enforcement duties in the county, and a special task force was being assembled to review every arrest made under the previous administration. I met John for breakfast at a diner across from the courthouse. He slid a tablet across the table, showing me the morning headlines. "Sheriffs fall from grace. Badge of dishonor inside a corrupt empire. FBI director's traffic stop uncovers trafficking ring." Below the headlines were photos of the sheriff's deputies being led into court, heads down, trying to shield their faces from cameras. Their names and badge numbers were printed in bold, alongside details of their alleged crimes. "Their lives are over," John said, stirring his coffee. "Even if by some miracle they beat some of these charges, they'll never work in law enforcement again. Hell, they'll be lucky to get jobs flipping burgers." I nodded, feeling not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of rightness. "What about the victims?" "We've identified 27 so far. Support services are reaching out, offering counseling, legal help, visa assistance for the undocumented ones. It's a start." That afternoon, I testified before a hastily assembled congressional committee on police corruption. C-SPAN carried it live. I spoke for 3 hours, detailing not just what had happened to my wife and me, but the broader pattern of abuse we'd uncovered. The committee members, normally divided along partisan lines, were united in their outrage. "This case has shaken the public's trust in law enforcement," the chairwoman said. "Director Williams, what can be done to restore that trust?" I leaned into the microphone. "Transparency, accountability, and consequences for those who betray their oath." As I left the Capitol, my phone buzzed with a news alert. The sheriff's attorney had quit, citing irreconcilable differences with his client. The photo showed the lawyer hurrying to his car, refusing to comment as reporters swarmed around him. The system was working. The corrupt were falling, and I was still standing. Weeks slipped by like water through fingers. The headlines about the sheriff and his crew faded from national attention, replaced by the next outrage, the next scandal. But in our lives, the ripples continued to spread. I sat beside my wife on our living room couch, her head resting against my shoulder as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink through our apartment windows. Her physical wounds had mostly healed, the bruises from the taser barbs long gone, the cut on her forehead from the second attack now just a faint line. But I knew the invisible scars ran deeper. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, noticing her distant gaze. She traced a finger along my arm. "I was thinking about our vacation plans. Before all this happened. We'd been on our way to a beachside rental when we'd stopped at that gas station. A simple anniversary getaway that had turned into a nightmare. We could still go," I offered. "Different beach, maybe. Anywhere you want." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe in a few months. I'm not ready yet." I understood. Crowds still made her anxious. Unexpected noises could send her heart racing. And men in uniform, any uniform, caused her to tense up beside me. "What about that house in Vermont?" I suggested. "The one with the maple trees and the stream running behind it. You showed me the listing last year." Her eyes lit up with genuine interest for the first time in weeks. "You remember that?" "Of course I do. You talked about it for days. How we could retire there someday." She reached for her tablet and pulled up the real estate website. I wonder if it's still available. It wasn't, but we spent the next hour scrolling through similar properties, dreaming out loud about a future away from the city, away from the constant reminders of what we'd been through. For the first time since that night at the gas station, we were planning more than just getting through the next day. Later, as we prepared dinner together, a simple ritual that had become precious in its normalcy, she winced while reaching for a bowl on a high shelf. "Here, let me," I said, stepping in to help. "I can do it," she insisted, stretching again before sighing in frustration. The doctor said the shoulder pain might never completely go away. The scar from the surgery after the ambush was still an angry red line across her collarbone. I felt the familiar surge of anger rise within me, thinking about the masked men who'd attacked us, the sheriff who'd ordered it. But I pushed it down. Anger wouldn't help her heal. "We'll find a good physical therapist in Vermont," I said instead, "and maybe we can design the kitchen with lower shelves." She smiled at that, a real smile this time. "You're really serious about this moving thing, aren't you?" "I am if you are." That night as we lay in bed, she traced the scar on my forehead where I'd been slammed against the police car hood. "We match now," she whispered. "Battle scars," I agreed. "Do you ever regret it? Going after them the way you did?" I thought about it carefully. "Not the outcome, but I regret that you got hurt again because of my choices." She propped herself up on one elbow. "Don't do that, don't take that on yourself. We both decided to stay and fight. After you were already hurt once. And if we had just driven away, how many more people would have been hurt by them? How many more lives destroyed?" Her voice grew stronger with each word. "We did the right thing, even though it cost us." I pulled her close, marveling at her strength. She'd been the one most physically damaged by our ordeal, yet here she was, comforting me. "When did you get so wise?" I asked. "I've always been the smart one in this relationship," she teased, and we both laughed, a sound that had been too rare in our home lately. The next morning I found her at the kitchen table sketching floor plans for our hypothetical Vermont house. 3 bedrooms, she explained. One for us, one for guests, and one... She hesitated. "One for?" I prompted. "Maybe for a child someday?" Her voice was uncertain, vulnerable. I know we put that conversation on hold years ago when our careers got so busy, but I think I'm ready to revisit it. I felt something shift inside me, a door opening to a future I hadn't dared imagine during the dark days of our ordeal. I'd like that, I said, my voice thick with emotion. She reached across the table and took my hand. We're going to be okay, aren't we? I looked at our intertwined fingers, hers still bearing the faint marks of hospital tape, mine with knuckles that had finally healed from fighting off our attackers. We're already okay, I told her, and we're going to be even better. That evening, we sat on our small balcony watching the city lights come on as darkness fell. We'd been through hell together, but somehow we'd emerged not just intact, but stronger. Every scar, every lingering pain, every nightmare that still occasionally jolted us awake. They were all reminders of how close we'd come to losing everything. But they were also proof of what we'd survived, together. I love you, she said simply, leaning her head against my shoulder. I love you too, I replied, holding her close, feeling her heartbeat against mine. We still had healing to do, both of us. But for the first time since that night at the gas station, I felt certain we would get there. Not just back to where we were before, but somewhere new, somewhere better, built on the foundation of what we'd endured and overcome together. The farmhouse we found sat on 12 acres of rolling land just outside of D.C., close enough for my commute but far enough to feel like we'd escaped. The 2-story white clapboard house with its wraparound porch had stood for over a century, weathering wars and depressions, presidential scandals and national triumphs. Now it would weather our healing too. What do you think? I asked my wife as we stood in the driveway that first day, keys in hand, the moving truck rumbling behind us. She tilted her head back, breathing in the September air. It smells like possibility. That was 3 months ago. Now, as winter settled over our land, we'd established rituals that anchored us to this new life. Every morning I woke before dawn. While my wife slept, I'd make coffee and carry it to the small office we'd set up in what was once a sewing room. There, in the drawer of an antique desk we'd found at a local auction, I kept my FBI director badge in its leather wallet. Each morning I polished that badge, not because it needed it, the gold eagle and shield gleamed regardless, but because the ritual reminded me of what it represented. Justice, truth, the ideals that had nearly cost us everything but ultimately saved us too. This morning was no different. I sat at the desk, badge in one hand, soft cloth in the other, as the first hint of dawn crept through the window. Outside, frost covered the fields, and the bare branches of the old oak trees stood stark against the lightening sky. The house creaked and settled around me, a living thing adjusting to the cold. I ran the cloth over the badge's surface, feeling each ridge and valley beneath my fingertips. The weight of it still surprised me sometimes. Not its physical heft, but what it represented. The responsibility, the power to change lives. I thought back to that gas station, to the moment when flashing my badge had meant nothing to men drunk on their own authority. How different things were now. The FBI director's badge opened doors, commanded respect, gave me the platform to implement the changes I'd promised myself I'd make during those dark days. My wife's footsteps padded down the hallway, and she appeared in the doorway wrapped in her favorite oversized cardigan. "You're up early," she said, voice still husky with sleep. Couldn't sleep. I slipped the badge back into its wallet. Thinking about the oversight committee meeting today. She crossed the room and stood behind me, her hands coming to rest on my shoulders. The police accountability bill? Yeah. I covered her hand with mine. If it passes, it'll be the most comprehensive reform in 30 years. Body cameras that can't be turned off, civilian review boards with actual teeth, federal funding tied to departmental transparency. Because of what happened to us, she said softly. I nodded. Because of what happened to us. She leaned down and kissed the top of my head. I'm proud of you. After breakfast, we bundled up and walked the perimeter of our property, something we tried to do every morning regardless of weather. The cold air bit at our cheeks, but the exertion kept us warm. The therapy group wants me to speak next week, my wife said as we crested the small hill that marked the eastern boundary of our land. About recovery, about moving forward. I glanced at her profile, stronger now than it had been months ago. Are you ready for that? She nodded, her breath clouding in the cold air. I think so. I want to help others see that there's life after trauma. That justice doesn't always look like what you expect. I knew what she meant. In the immediate aftermath of the arrests, I'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I'd felt hollow, watching the sheriff and his cronies led away in handcuffs. Their downfall hadn't erased what had happened to us. It hadn't healed my wife's injuries or erased the nightmares that still occasionally jolted us both awake. True justice, I was learning, wasn't a moment. It wasn't the satisfying slam of a cell door or the flash of cameras as corrupt men faced their reckoning. Justice was the slow, steady work of rebuilding systems. It was the daily commitment to truth. It was this: my wife and I, walking our land, breathing clean air, living our lives with purpose and meaning despite what had been done to us. "Look," she said, pointing to the sky. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, free and fierce. We stood together watching it, my arm around her waist, her head on my shoulder. The land stretched before us, dormant now but full of promise for spring. Like us. Like the country I'd sworn to serve. "We should head back," I said eventually. "I need to get to the office." She nodded and we turned toward home. As we walked, she told me about her plans for the vegetable garden she wanted to plant come spring, about the local farmers market where she'd been selling her paintings, about the community center where she'd started volunteering. I listened, marveling at her resilience, at how she'd transformed her pain into purpose. I'd done the same with my position, using my platform to speak truth to power, to implement changes that would prevent others from suffering as we had. Back at the house, I dressed for work while she made more coffee. Before leaving, I paused in the doorway of our kitchen, watching her move about the space we'd made our own. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the highlights in her hair, illuminating the peaceful expression on her face. "I love you," I said. She looked up and smiled, that full, genuine smile that had returned to her face only recently. "I love you too. Go change the world." I patted my pocket where my badge rested. One day at a time. If you enjoyed this story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.